All right, we are diving deep today, folks. We're tackling Shannon Ethridge's Every Woman's Battle and this whole idea of sexual and emotional integrity. And let me tell you, it's a lot more layered than you might think at first glance. To help us unpack it all, we've got excerpts from Etheridge's book itself, and to add another layer, this really interesting article from Prevention magazine going all the way back to 1999. I don't know about you, but I am ready for some serious aha moments.
Oh, absolutely. And, one of the things that makes Etheridge's approach so powerful is how she goes straight to the heart of the matter, literally. For women, she argues this battle for sexual integrity, it's not just about, setting physical boundaries. It's about understanding this whole emotional world we live in.
Yeah, it's like she's saying, hold on, there's a whole emotional landscape here we need to explore before we even get to the behaviors.
Exactly. And she starts by kind of flipping the script on a pretty common assumption, this idea that, men struggle with sexual integrity more than women do. And while she acknowledges that men might be more visually wired, you know, she makes a really compelling case that women often face a very different kind of battleground, one that's, like we said, rooted in these deep emotional needs and expectations.
And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Like those times when we're feeling let down, maybe a relationship isn't what we hoped, or just life throws us a curveball. Those unmet expectations, they can really mess with how we see ourselves, right?
hmm
And then the choices we make. I mean, it's all connected.
Absolutely. And Etheridge, she doesn't shy away from the tough stuff. She talks about women trying to fill that emotional void, that emptiness, in ways that ultimately hurt them, like getting lost in fantasies or seeking connection in places that just aren't healthy, especially outside of marriage. Those stories, they really highlight just how interconnected our emotional and sexual well-being truly are.
It's kind of a sobering thought, isn't it? That it's not just about like checking boxes, do this, don't do that. It goes so much deeper.
It really does. And that's where this idea of tabletop sexuality comes in.
Okay, I gotta be honest. When I first heard that phrase, tabletop sexuality, I was picturing something completely different.
Right. It's definitely a catchy term, but it's actually a really brilliant analogy. So picture a table, right? A regular table with four legs. Those legs, they represent your mind, your heart, your mouth, and your body. Each one is super important for the table to stand, right? Now, what happens if even one of those legs is weak or wobbly?
Well, the whole table collapses.
Exactly.
Uh,
And that's Etheridge's point.
yeah.
True sexual and emotional integrity, it's not just about the physical stuff. It's about making sure your thoughts, your words, even your emotions, they're all strong and aligned. If one leg's weak, the whole table is at risk.
Wow, I love that. That image really brings it home, doesn't it? It makes you think about the boundaries we set in all areas of our lives,
Yeah.
not just the physical ones. So we're thinking about our emotional and sexual integrity, like this table, right?
Mhm.
With all these different legs that need to be strong. So how do we actually make sure that happens, especially when it feels like there's so much out there just trying to knock us off balance?
Well, that's where Etheridge gets really down to earth, really practical. She digs into these myths about sexuality and relationships, things we hear all the time, maybe even believe, but they're actually sabotaging our efforts. She even calls them landmines on the battleground.
Landmines. Okay, yeah, that's an image that definitely sticks with you. So, like, what are some of these landmines we should be watching out for? What should we be aware of?
Well, one of the big ones is this whole fantasizing is harmless thing.
Okay.
Like it's just in my head, it's not like I'm actually doing anything.
Oh, tell me about it. I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
But Etheridge would say that those thoughts, they still carry weight, right? Even if they're just thoughts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She argues that dwelling on those fantasies, even if we never act on them, it can actually start to chip away at our foundation.
Mm.
Like it makes it harder to resist temptation when it comes up in real life.
Yeah, yeah. It's like creating a crack in one of those table legs. It might seem small at first, but it weakens the whole structure over time.
Exactly. And then there's this other myth, this idea that I'm mature enough, I can handle any movie, any book.
Hmm.
But Etheridge, she really pushes back on that. She points out just how much our media consumption is impacting us, often without us even realizing it.
Right. Like she talks about this experiment she did, I think it was with a youth group, where she showed them clips from popular sitcoms, totally normal shows, but she edited them to only include the sexual innuendos.
Oh, yeah. That one was fascinating and kind of shocking, really.
Yeah.
Because even the adults in the room, they totally underestimated how much suggestive content had just been, like, thrown at them.
It makes you wonder, right? If even just a few minutes of, quote, harmless TV can have that effect, What about this constant barrage of images and messages we're dealing with every single day?
Exactly. And that's where this idea of desensitization comes in. Etheridge's point is that this constant exposure, especially to sexualized content in media, it can actually numb us. It's
Yeah.
like our internal alarm system gets totally overloaded and then it just stops working.
Oh, wow. So instead of being aware of the potential harm, we just become numb to it.
Exactly. And that numbness, it can really distort how we see things. Like suddenly our perception of healthy relationships, real intimacy, even our own self-worth, it all gets out of whack. We start to see this skewed version of reality as totally normal.
It's like looking through a distorted lens, right? Everything looks different, but we don't even realize the lens itself is the problem. So then how do we break free from that? How do we start to see things clearly again? Okay, so we've talked about these landmines, these sneaky little myths that can really trip us up. But it's not enough to just avoid the bad stuff, right? Etheridge also gives us this whole game plan for building strength, for actually, guarding our hearts and minds. What were some of the strategies that really resonated with you?
One that really stood out to me was this idea of mind control.
Okay.
And I know it sounds kind of intense, right? Like, we're not talking about becoming robots or anything, but it's really about taking ownership of our thoughts,
Yeah.
like being intentional about what we allow in.
Right, like what are we watching? What are we reading? Even what kind of conversations are we having? It's like being the bouncer at the door of our own minds.
Yes, exactly. But the thing is, that takes practice, right? Especially these days. Social media is like this constant stream of information. It's hard to even know where to start.
Seriously. Okay, so how do we actually do it? How do we take control?
Well, one thing Etheridge talks about is this idea of mental rehearsal. Like, we can actually train our minds to resist temptation. Let's say you catch yourself dwelling on something you know isn't good for you. You can practice shutting down those thoughts,
Ugh.
like actively redirecting your attention to something positive, something life-giving.
So it's like telling your brain, nope, not today. We're not going down that road. We've got better things to think about.
Yes,
Ah,
exactly.
love that.
And it's not just our thoughts either. Etheridge also talks about this idea of taming the tongue.
Oh, now that's a big one. It's so easy to just say whatever pops into our heads. But words have power, right?
Absolutely. And she's not even just talking about like avoiding gossip or, being mean. She's talking about those little things, like even harmless flirting or complaining, especially with someone of the opposite sex. It can be a slippery slope.
Hmm.
Create distance in our important relationships without us even realizing it.
Yeah, it's like she's saying pay attention to those seemingly small interactions because they can have a ripple effect.
Yes, 100%. And that's where choosing our company wisely comes in too, right?
Yeah.
Are we surrounding ourselves with people who get it, who are cheering us on in this, or are the people around us kind of pulling us in the opposite direction?
That is so huge. It's like that saying, you become who you spend time with. If we're constantly around people who don't value integrity, it's got to be a million times harder to stay strong in our own lives.
For sure. But then on the flip side, when we intentionally build a tribe of people who get it, who inspire us, who want to see us win, that's powerful.
It's like having your own personal cheer squad. Right.
Yeah.
Cheering you on. I love it. But it's not all about defense either, right? It's not just about building walls and keeping things out. Etheridge also talks about this beautiful idea of true fulfillment, like finding intimacy that goes so much deeper than just the physical stuff.
Absolutely. And she's really clear that real intimacy, it's not just physical. It's about this deep soul-level connection with God, with our spouse. It's about communication, vulnerability, really understanding and valuing each other.
And there was this one thing that really made me think. She talked about viewing sex as an act of worship. And I have to admit, I had to kind of wrap my head around that one at first.
I hear you. It's a powerful concept. But when you think about a husband or wife coming together in this space of love, respect, surrender,
Mm-hmm.
that physical intimacy, it becomes a reflection of something much deeper.
Yeah.
Their connection to each other, their connection to God.
It's like their physical union becomes almost sacred, a tangible expression of their commitment both to each other and to their faith.
Exactly. And that's such a beautiful way to approach intimacy. It's not just a physical act. It's a way to deepen our connection with our spouse, with our creator. It's about so much more. And that actually leads right into Etheridge's idea of retreating with the king.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about that.
So it's this idea of making time, dedicated time, to cultivate that deep, intimate relationship with God. Like, imagine scheduling a date, but it's with the one who knows you better than anyone.
And just like with any relationship, that takes effort, right? It takes being intentional, making the time, being present.
Exactly. And she even says, like, get creative with it. Write letters to God, create a special atmosphere for prayer. If you want to get dressed up for it, go for it. It's about honoring that relationship, recognizing that it's the foundation for everything else in our lives.
Oh, I love that. Because when we have that strong foundation, that's where our strength comes from to handle everything else, right? Our relationships, our sense of worth, even just facing the everyday challenges of life, it all flows from that.
100%.
Well, this has been incredible. As we wrap up this deep dive into every woman's battle, what's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from this conversation?
If there's one thing I hope people hear, it's that this journey toward sexual and emotional integrity, it's not about being perfect. It's not about following some rigid set of rules. It's about connection. Connecting with God, understanding ourselves, and making choices that line up with what we truly value. It's about giving ourselves grace along the way and remembering that real fulfillment, lasting joy, it comes from a place of wholeness. It comes from knowing who we are and
Mm.
whose we are. And that's a journey worth taking.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a journey worth taking one step at a time. Thanks for diving deep with us today, everyone.